really big thank you goes to Colorado Parks and Wildlife staff, particularly our presenter today, Matt Yamashita, but also all the rest of the staff that continue to provide ACES and Open Space and Trails in Pitkin County with information and assistance all across the board, from bears and dumpsters to big statewide reintroductions. So thank you very much. Like I mentioned, we'll have some time at the end of the presentation for some engagement and questions and answers. Just a reminder, wolves can be a contentious issue, but this is a respectful place, and we're all humans here. So please be respectful of each other. And without further ado, I think I'll pass it over to Matt to kick it off and tell us what it's going to be like living with wolves.
Okay, I think it's going, but you won't be able to hear it anyway. So, thank you. My name's Matt Yamashita. I know several of you. For those that I don't know, I'm the Area Wildlife Manager for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I work out of the Glenwood Springs office. Some of you know I was here working in the Basalt District for several years before I went down to Glenwood. There's some other CPW staff here that I wanted to recognize too, because they're going to be coming up and helping present, helping answer questions. Curtis Tesh, he's our local officer here in the Upper Roaring Fork, so he covers Aspen, Snowmass, Woody Creek, a lot of this Upper Roaring Fork portion of the valley. Rachel Gonzalez, she's our public information officer. She's out of Grand Junction. Becca Ryan, she's in the back there. She's our officer out of Glenwood. She's been here for a couple years. She was also initially our rover in the area, and now she's moved into the Glenwood Springs district. And then John Groves he's hiding, weird. So John Groves is our officer out of Carbondale. They'll come up and they'll be periodically inserting themselves in some of this presentation, helping present some of the material. But like I said, at the end of the day, the purpose of this meeting is to talk about things on a local context. There's been a lot of information that our agency has pushed out and made publicly available. Most of that, being a statewide agency, is on a statewide scale. So we're talking about things that affect all constituents, all communities, the entire state of Colorado. Our goal is to make sure that we host a conversation that's specific to what we in the Roaring Fork Valley know, what we think, what we hold near and dear, everything else. So ask your questions. We'll field your answers. Do recognize that there's some of this stuff. I mean, I had to print off a note sheet today because there's a lot of information in here. We're learning wolves too. If you ask me a question about bears, I don't need any fact sheet or anything else. I'll give you more information than you'll ever want to know about bears and lions and moose and everything else. We know what we know. Managing wolves is a new thing for our agency. Most of our staff, we do have staff that we have brought on since wolves were reintroduced into the state that are specialists. They have experience managing wolves in Wyoming and Montana and other locations. So they were brought here with a purpose. For a lot of us, this is our first crack at it too, and we're learning as we go, kind of building so we can't get the microphone to work, but we'll serenade you with other stuff. So anyway, so for this evening, I'll kind of cover a couple things. If I can get this to work. It's not going to work. I just used the clicker. Clicker didn't work. So today, focusing on just local context on stuff. We'll cover some of the release stuff for this year. We started releases as an agency. We started releasing animals and reintroducing animals into the state of Colorado last year. So that was in December 2023 was when we first reintroduced wolves. That being said, we had wolves naturally already migrating into the state starting back in 2020. So we'll cover some of that, just letting you guys know, filling in the gaps on information related to animals that are in the state, what our current status is, what we're monitoring, what we're paying attention to, where that goes. And then we'll move into some of the later topics on, specific to wolf behavior, some of the generic wolf biology, things that are similar. You'll probably recognize those from other species you're familiar with. And then we'll go into some of the wolf-specific things that are new to us. They're not found in other local species here. The last part of it, we'll go through and we'll discuss some of just the preventative mechanisms, some of the things that you guys should keep in mind as residents, as visitors, as people that are here in the county, things that you should be aware of. Nothing really, most of it's not news to you. You'll see a lot of it's very, very familiar with other species and other things that we would otherwise recommend whenever you're out recreating in Pitkin County. So. I'm good. So this year, 2025, we've got an upcoming release season here. So for our agency, our capture and release window for most wildlife species generally starts in January of any year, ends in March of any year. That would be the same if we were doing moose or if we were doing mountain lions or bighorn sheep, deer. That's typically when we move animals. There's a lot of biological reasons for it. Animals are concentrated that time of year. Typically, with the colder temperatures, they're not as susceptible to some of these other, some of the detrimental types of things. We call it capture myopathy. There's harm that can be caused to those animals under high temperature, high stressful events. So this time of year lends itself to capture and handling animals. This is when we see the least impact on those species. You think about spring and summer, that's when animals are having their young, rearing their young. There's also impacts associated with that, so we're trying to avoid that. So we're slated to try to capture animals here starting this month, January. The animals we're getting this year, there's an agreement that was reached with British Columbia up in Canada, so we'll be getting animals from British Columbia. Last year, the animals we got were from Oregon. So every year we're working on new agreements, trying not to take all the animals from one site, making sure that the animals that we're receiving, though, are animals that are suitable for Colorado habitats. So we have staff that's going to be traveling up to BC. They're going to be up there. That staff includes some of our veterinarian staff, some of our wolf program specialists. We have other field staff, just like you see here in the room, that are accompanying them. We're participating in all that stuff. Those animals they capture up there, they're working with BC officials, and they'll be going and monitoring those animals. They'll be testing them on site, making sure that they're healthy animals, that they're suitable for transplant down here. We're not wanting to bring animals that have things that are obviously wrong at the get-go. We're also not wanting to introduce any kind of disease down here in the States. So we're going to be doing all that on site up there before we ever bring animals into the States. Every animal that we bring down here, just like in 2023, will be affixed with a collar, GPS collar. These collars, they have variable rates of transmission. So currently, the animals that we have collared in the state, they're all collared. They all send a GPS signal, but it's not real-time data. Those collars, they produce a signal to the satellite once every 16 hours. So they're taking a GPS point once every 4 hours, but they only upload that information every 16 hours. So whenever our agency gets a pin on it, it's old news. The most recent data we have is minimum 4 hours old, but reasonably up to 16 hours old. With that in mind, you guys can come in. There's additional seats up here. But with that in mind, there's often times where these animals think about the habitats they're in. When they're in tree cover, when they're under brush, when they're in dens, when they're in some of these steep terrain, this country here. If there's no connectivity to the satellite during that window when that satellite's supposed to be uploading the data, it just bypasses it, and it'll wait till the next event to upload that information. So there's periods where we don't get information for 4 or 5 days at a time, and then suddenly they'll finally be in a location where that caller will upload the data, and now we'll get 20 points over the last however many days we missed. But it's one of those things that just to kind of put some truth to that one. Everybody's thinking, oh, we got callers, we can track these things and know when they're coming down, when they're approaching town, as they're walking down, and it's just, that's not how these callers function. If we were to increase the rate of frequency on transmission of these callers, it decreases the battery life, and then we're forced to go out, recapture, rehandle these animals. Every time we rehandle an animal, it increases the risk of that animal being injured, something bad happening with the animal. So we want to handle them as infrequently as possible. That's kind of the quick overview of some of that stuff there. this is specific. I mean, this is showing up in some of our other meetings, but the question always comes up, you know, like, will these animals, are these ones that are feeding on domestic livestock in other locations? Our staff, the staff that are on the capture side of things, their job up there is to make sure that as they're going through some of this and assessing these animals, they're trying their best to not select animals that have a history or have recent depredation events where they are specifically targeting, whether it's sheep, cattle, goats, whatever else. We don't want to introduce animals that are already trained on those prey sources to come down here and find that same thing in your backyards here. So that's one of the precautionary measures that's being taken. Once they get down here, we're not holding them for any period of time. I mean, we're trying to get these animals on the landscape as quick as possible, understanding that they've already been captured, they've been handled, they've had collars on them, they've had needles poking them, they've had to make a flight down, 6 hours internationally to get here. So they're already under a high degree of stress. Our goal, once they come into the state, is to get them on the landscape and get them someplace where they can kind of find some rest and relaxation as quick as possible. This middle bullet point, this section here, read through some of that stuff. Our goal as an agency, so Prop 114, when that proposition was passed, turned into state statute, that statute mandates that we as an agency, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, reintroduce and we manage for a sustainable population of gray wolves within Colorado. By state statute, that's what we're mandated to do. So we don't have any wiggle room. Our job as an agency is to uphold the statutes of this state. That's what we're doing. We're following through with the will of the voters of Colorado, and we are implementing what they voted on and passed as a ballot initiative. When we do that, our goal is we're trying to get there as quick as we can. Our goal is to establish packs in this state. Packs means numbers. So we're trying to get numbers of animals into the state so that we can start getting these packs on the ground. Everything I'm going to be presenting here later on in this presentation is on the basis of what we know about wolf behavior. So much of that it's a social thing. I mean, wolves are social animals, and so much of what they do and what we know about them and what we can actually manage for as wildlife managers is based on the social side of it. With animals on the ground in singles and pairs, we don't have that social hierarchy, that social part of wildlife management established. There's a lot of variables, there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of uncertainties. There's a lot of things that we can't predict, that we can't respond to, we can't do anything with. So right now, there's this weird stage where we're trying to be methodical about making sure we're taking the right steps, but at the same time, we are trying to get animals in state and get packs established, get breeding pairs established, have them successfully reproduce so that we can establish territories, and based on those territories, we know what we're supposed to manage for now. Right now, what you'll see here in a little bit, there's a lot of variability to everything that we're already managing for. There's a lot of unknowns and uncertainties, and it's making our jobs infinitely more complex. We have been working with other agencies, Colorado Department of Agriculture, a lot of NGOs, NRCS. We're working with a lot of these other groups in order to get tools implemented in this state and put on the ground. It's kind of goofy because we're building the plane as it's being flown. We're building a lot of these tools and other things. Whenever that statute was passed, it went into effect immediately. And the way that statute was written was that we as an agency had to have wolves on the ground within the year. So it didn't afford us 3, 5, 10 years of planning, which which a lot of these things take time. You guys understand how that is. But we're trying to figure this stuff out. It's kind of being weird and wonky, but we're getting some of this stuff going. We are implementing tools, and we're learning as we go, and we're getting some of these different mechanisms put in place in order to help ourselves, help the communities, help the residents, help the producers of this state make good of things as things happen. So it's going to be a learning process, honestly, for the better part of the first decade, likely beyond that. It's all new. Like I said earlier, when it comes to bear management, we already have a lot of that stuff. We've checked the box. That comes after decades and decades of experience doing it, figuring those things out. We haven't problem solved all this stuff yet. We haven't been hit with some of the problems. The one thing I'll bring up, specific to what we're talking about here, you guys recognize Colorado is different than a lot of other places in this world. We've brought in expertise in our staff that have managed wolves in Montana and Wyoming and have experience with some of these critters in other locations. I can tell you, Colorado, the Roaring Fork Valley is not the same as Wyoming. It's not the same as Montana. You guys recognize that. So whenever, as we're managing bears here in the Roaring Fork Valley, yeah, we have textbooks that tell us, what bear biology is and what bear behavior is. We have our own version of what bear management is specific to our local, geography, our local populations here, because bears behave differently in Aspen than they do in the rest of the state. So, we have to tweak some of our tools and what our knowledge set is. We're going to have to figure this out as well, because wolves, we're learning. I mean, there's some stuff there that we know about wolves, but my suspicion is that as wolves find their home in Pitkin County and some of our adjacent landscapes here, it's going to be a different rendition of wolf management than we've experienced in other places in the world. Reintroductions. This is straight out of our reintroduction to management plan. So if you were to open our website and take a look at that plan, it is a lengthy document. One of the things in there is it highlights, we had to select portions of the state. So the statute says we had to reintroduce wolves west of the Continental Divide. That was how it was written into law. So we couldn't consider anything on the eastern half of the state. It had to be west of the Continental Divide. You'll see some hard boundaries up to the north and to the west there. Those are administrative boundaries. Those are boundaries that are 60 miles from the border with Utah or with Wyoming. Those were put in place because there were agreements made with our state and with our neighboring states that if we went and released wolves, that we wouldn't allow them to move into those other states. If they moved into Utah, our agreement with the state of Utah was going to be that we would have to go capture those wolves from Utah and bring them back. With that in mind, we know wolves move. So we weren't going to want to put a wolf on the boundary of Utah, on the border of Utah, have it move across there, waste, staff time, dollars, everything else to go do that and bring it back and hit repeat every 2 weeks. So that 60-mile buffer is essentially to establish some sort of a buffer that it doesn't preclude, but it mitigates some of that movement that would otherwise be expected for wolves. Just, makes it a little bit harder. Maybe there's more reason to believe that they're going to stay here where we kick them free inside of that 60-mile boundary. With Wyoming, similar thing. They have their own management strategy up in Wyoming. You guys have probably read over the years, Wyoming, the southern portion of Wyoming has a very different management strategy than where we're at right now. The south portion of Wyoming, they're not endangered there. They are not a listed species, so they're allowed to hunt them there. The minute wolves move into Wyoming, they can legally be harvested by hunters as they move across the boundary. Obviously, with our statute saying that our agency is obligated to reintroduce and manage for a sustainable population, we didn't want wolves moving out of the state, being harvested and removed from a population and not contributing toward our management of a sustainable population. So that's where those boundaries come in. The colors on here, the other one map I had a key, but so there's a sliding scale. This was based off of a postdoc at CSU at the time that came through, and he came up with this conflict model. So the model started from white, and it gradually progressed across, and it got to darker shades of green. The darker the shade of green, the higher the ecological suitability. So that was looking at prey species availability. Availability of deer, elk, moose, the species that wolves feed on. As you went on the vertical on the y-axis, it would go from white again to a shade of pink red kind of thing. And as you got into a different shade of pink, the darker the shade of pink, that was the increasing risk of conflict. So that was taking a look at the presence of livestock in those areas there. As you converge and you combine the green and the pink, that's where you'll see these shades of blue and purple. Those have the combination, so the darker that is, it means it's a combination of conflict and ecological suitability. Focus in on the area around Aspen, and as you go towards, kind of up there towards Glenwood Springs, Pitkin County is all this. If you look where those red lines kind of converge right there, Pitkin County, the northern boundary of Pitkin County is right below that, and then it kind of ends right here on that red line and goes over back behind Aspen there. You'll note that the struggle here is there's a lot of white. White would be low ecological suitability. So, you guys can recognize, you walk out the door here and look around, we are surrounded by high elevation mountains. We don't have a lot of deer and elk here this time of year. All of our prey species, they move down in elevation. So when it comes to ecological suitability, it makes it tough. We're really, really limited in where we can go. You look at a lot of these places in these polygons and you start seeing a lot of blues and purples. There's a high degree of conflict in a lot of those locations as well. So trying to find some of these ideal places to put a wolf is it's difficult. One of the other things to highlight in here that it doesn't show up on this map, but a part of our consideration is that right now, our agency, we're only authorized to release these animals on state-owned lands. It has to be state or privately owned lands. That's all we have access to. So the private landowner would have to come to us and say, hey, I have the authority, I have the standing on my property, yeah, you're allowed to release them here. Haven't gotten a lot of those phone calls. I'll be pretty honest. When it comes to state-owned lands, I mean, you guys live here in this area. There's not a whole lot of state-owned land in this valley. We just don't have it here. High cost of land, everything else contributes toward that, but we have very limited parcels in where we can kick an animal free. We have a lot of public lands here, but most of them are federally owned, and without NEPA, we aren't allowed to go and release animals on federal lands. So that's this year. Last year, we released them in the northern portion of this area, so that green polygon, that's considered the northern release zone. We released them in there. The reason for it is that I had mentioned earlier, we had wolves naturally migrate into the state in 2020. They found homes up in the Jackson County, the North Park area up by Walden, so they were already hanging out up there. We wanted to supplement some of those animals, so that's where those releases from last year played into that. This year, we're planning to do the same with a lot of our releases. The northern zone was highlighted again for that same reason. We have more wolves on the ground than we had in 2020, but we still don't have enough. We're still not having breeding populations. So we're trying to hedge our bets and kick animals free in the same area in order to kind of backfill some of that with the attempt of getting breeding pairs on the ground, establishing packs. Moving forward, we're starting to reach agreements with the Southern Ute tribe, those tribal nations down in the southwest corner of the state, to start targeting some of this southern zone. That's all still part of that state statute that we would be able to release them west of the Continental Divide, but in that southwestern corner of the state. So we're exploring some of that for future years. Right now, for the plan states for the first 5 years, we're looking at introducing 10 to 15 wolves annually for the first 3 to 5 years until we can get 30 to 50 wolves established on the ground. Just a quick recap. This year, we had some wolves die. We had a couple of them, I'm sure you saw in the media. One of them was killed, somebody shot it, so there's an ongoing investigation right now. Currently, in the state of Colorado, these wolves are still federally protected. Fish and Wildlife Service, as our federal agency, they're the ones leading that investigation. Our commissioned officers are obviously helping with that. Nobody in this room, it was in different locations, but the Fish and Wildlife Service is the lead agency on that investigation. We've had 2 other animals die in this state, so that's -3 wolves already out of the gate. When we only brought in 10, that drops us down to 7. That's, every animal counts for us right now, so we're trying to figure out where to go with that one. This year, we're proposed to bring in 15 in order to supplement some of that. We've highlighted, knowing that we're probably going to be looking at this southern zone in next year or upcoming years. We have locations both north and south of I-70 that are highlighted because of the connectivity between those habitats. Okay, so this plays right into some of the historical context. If you look at the historical range of gray wolves in the continental U.S., that's where they've been. Most of the United States had wolves in it at some point. In Colorado, they're extirpated. They're a species that was present here. The last wolf that we knew of was back in the 1940s. From the 1940s until 2020, we had some wolves periodically come into the state. Most of the ones that we had come into the state either left immediately or were killed. We had a couple of them that one was accidentally shot by a coyote hunter several years ago up in the middle part by Kremling area. We had one that was killed on I-70 by Idaho Springs back in the early 2000s. So we had some that wandered into the state, but we didn't know of any that were actually living, surviving in the state over any period of time until 2020. That's when we started getting the pack established in North Park. If you look at the current range, that's what currently exists in the United States. There's a gross difference. That was the whole goal of that statute, was to re-expand that range of gray wolves. What I'm going to show you now is, so from December 2023, that's when we first reintroduced wolves, and I'm going to show you till December of this past year where some of that movement is. So if you're not familiar, our agency puts out a map every 35 days. We take a window, a period of time, and we use what's called the HUC maps, the hydrologic unit codes. And we base it off of the hydrologic hydrologic units it's a watershed. So we look at these watersheds, and if a wolf sets foot within that watershed and we have a collar point that pops up in there, then we will highlight that watershed for that time period. The wolf only has to be in there for one collar point. Doesn't mean that the wolf is still there, doesn't mean that it's making a home there, it just means that it was there. It showed up actively there at one point during that 35-day period. So all the purple, everything shaded in purple is where we had received a collar point from this time frame, from December 18th when we first released wolves in 2023 up until January. I'm just going to progress along, and I think this will, you can see the next period, how some of that movement shifted. All of that portion up there by Walden, that was all that some of the existing pack that was up there. We didn't release any animals there. The animals we released were down closer towards Kremling, Granby area, and this here. But you can see even with that there's still some distribution happening. Next period, they're starting to move more. They're exploring a little bit further west. Take a look at the date on the bottom, February through March. This is still winter months, so they're moving over there. A lot of these ones that were moving there, they moved across over into Rio Blanco County and immediately turned around and said, yeah, it's pretty darn snowy over here. Moved straight back. So they were there. They made an appearance, but they didn't loiter there. You'll see on the next maps, Rio Blanco's not highlighted. So, it tells a story. It's a thing that if you remove the political side of things and the social side of everything, that is what people pay attention to with wolves in the state of Colorado, and you look at it strictly from a biological lens, there's some interesting things just paying attention to how things are moving and how things change. So as we get into March, April, this is where starting in February is typically that time that if we were having animals pair up, males and females pair up to breed, that's when we would be expecting them to start breeding and looking for den sites. So this is where we are paying attention to, does any of this translate into den sites? As we move forward, looking at some of the stuff, maps didn't really change. Maps don't change a whole lot. You'll note that there's some of these parcels that are highlighted south of I-70 there. That's just because the animals hadn't moved across I-70. That right there is because that hydrologic unit, that watershed, extends on both sides of the interstate. So when we highlighted part of it, it highlighted the whole watershed, which highlights portions that are south of I-70. But animals at that point had not moved across I-70. Same thing there. You'll see more movement to the north up Routt County. We keep fast forwarding through the summer months, and honestly, they're moving, but they didn't move a whole lot more than they had during the winter months. Still a lot of the same ranges. Moving into late summer. Then as we start moving into fall, we start moving closer into September, October. Then you'll start noticing that we start highlighting some of this stuff south of I-70 here. So there we did have one collared animal that had spent the majority of the summer hanging out somewhere in that Vail Pass area north of I-70. Collar points showing that it was testing I-70, but there's a lot of traffic on I-70. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of things that, animals see as a threat. They did not move across I-70. She wouldn't leave that area. Something felt comfortable to her at some point this past fall, and she made the movement down south of I-70. So it was interesting on the front that, right now we're looking at what are considered movement barriers. That was obviously noted to us as a significant movement barrier, given that animals were that hesitant to cross it and had been exploring it for several months, but it took them a long time to finally get across that threshold. Fast forward, there's that gap there, and that's because there were no animals present in there during that 35-day window. But look south of there, and that's because that one animal was south of I-70, and so she ventured into those hydrologic units right there. Also note, as you go up by Meeker and Maybell, some of that country up there, there was an animal that it started exploring further west. So they were moving, they were figuring our state out, they're moving around. That animal stuck around there for a little bit, and subsequently I think this one ends here, but it ended up moving back to the east again. So they're exploring the state, but they're definitely starting to demonstrate preferences. Real quick, so now we're going to go into some of just the biological stuff. I mentioned earlier what wolves prey on. Primarily, they're looking at our deer species, so that's deer, elk, moose. Those are their primary prey sources. Now, a lot of the stuff you guys have likely seen, heard, everything else, it's based on, they'll take down large animals. I mean, there's a bull elk, a mature bull elk, for example. You guys have probably seen or heard where they're killing moose. I mean, obviously, we have a lot of moose here in Aspen, and a moose is a huge creature. A lot of what we're seeing with our small group sizes and individual animals in the state, we're not seeing a whole lot of predation on moose in particular. Elk is fairly limited. If they're utilizing elk, so far it's been a lot of elk that have either died from other causes, roadkill, disease issues, other things. But if a single wolf has a much more difficult time on a prey size of elk, moose, everything else. It's when they're in packs. That's whenever we start seeing them working on moose and some of these other larger ungulate species. Outside of that, what we expect and what we've seen, some of these smaller prey species. So think about foxes, coyotes, badgers, skunks, raccoons, turkeys, fish, things like that. They're opportunistic. They will find food where they can find food. Liken it to bears. I mean, we know bears here. Bears will make food out of anything. If it smells like food, they will test it. They are going to figure it out. If it's a hot tub cover, they will eat it, and they will learn that it's not food. If it's motor oil, they will consume it because it smells like food. They will figure out things that aren't food. They will test it out to see if it's food. Wolves, they're very resourceful. They will do the same thing. They will find food where they can find food. Even on some of these ones, we were questioning, like, hey, a lot of our prey species moved out of the area. There's nothing there. What are they going to feed on? If they have to feed on insects to survive, they will find a way to survive. So just like most wild critters out there, they're crazy, crazy good at figuring out a way to live in this world. This was another point I had brought up earlier. So they live in family groups. I mean, realistically, packs of wolves. That's kind of what people typically associate. In Colorado, we just don't have that right now. We had a pack up in the Walden area back in 2020. That's where male and a female successfully denned up, bred, and then created a pack. Subsequently, most of those animals, that pack explored to the north, migrated into Wyoming. Several of those animals were killed by hunters up there, legally harvested by hunters up there. When the remaining animals returned back, there was no longer a pack. We had a second pack off of this release in 2023 that they ended up denning up in that Kremling area. They created a pack there. That was known as the Copper Creek Pack. That pack, same thing, there were issues there. There were issues associated with depredation of livestock. So as an agency, we went in and administratively removed them just to prevent them from continuing to kill livestock. After those animals were taken into captivity, the male from that pack ended up dying in captivity. It was in poor body condition. It subsequently ended up dying. That alone, the breeding male, losing that one, changes the dynamics of that pack significantly. That social hierarchy is disrupted. So that Copper Creek pack is still currently being held in Captivity. Our commission, they're exploring whether that pack will be returned to the wild, what the forecast is for that. We're waiting to hear from them what the final verdict on that is, what our marching orders are on things there. Fast forward. So wolf reproduction. I mean, I talked about it earlier. February, March is that general time frame when wolves are looking to breed. Wolves, they're just like you guys know dogs. I mean, dogs, if you give them an opportunity, they're gonna create pups as quick as they can. Wolves can successfully breed by their second year. So by the time they're 2 years old, they are reproductively mature and they can actually start breeding at that point. That's what we're trying to figure out on everything right now. When they breed, they create a hierarchy in there. So you guys have heard of the historical context is alpha male, alpha female. They have all that terminology associated. Most of that terminology is associated with captive animals. That's not accurate. What we use in the biological realm is based off of breeding pairs. So it's a breeding pair. It's the breeding male, the breeding female in the group. That's essentially what, on a wild setting, that's what we would equate to the otherwise dominant animals in that group. Their pack is comprised of their family group. I mean, that's the breeding male, the breeding female. They go and they den up, they create their litter. Their litter, that's what the pack is their offspring. They may have multiple generations of their offspring in there, but it's the mom and the dad, the breeding pairs, that's the genetic diversity there. Outside of that, once they establish their pack size is going to be based off of the resource, what the resource has available for them. If most packs, generally somewhere in that range of 6 to 8 animals-ish, based on how much space they have, how much food they have, how many other wolves are on the landscape around them. So all of those factors contribute towards pack size. Some of these places in the United States, Canada, other locations, you'll get packs of up to 20, 30 animals. They got a lot of food, they got a lot of space, they got some big packs up in those locations. We don't expect to have packs in Colorado that are anywhere close to that. We're pretty constricted on what we have available. Realistically, these packs of 6, 8 animals, that's probably more realistic. That's where you get, your breeding male, your breeding female, their offspring. As the pack starts to grow beyond the capacity of that, that's where they start kicking out members of that pack, and those members start dispersing. When they disperse, most places, that dispersal, they can disperse anywhere 20, 30. A lot of what we're seeing, what we know in other locations is that males will range out somewhere 50, 60, 70 miles. Females, typically it's a little less, 40 miles. Hard to say what's going to happen or what would happen in Colorado. We don't have packs that are interacting. We don't have established territories and established pack sizes. So difficult to make a prediction on what's here, but that's what we've seen in other places that have similar habitats. We'll see. There's coming up here there's going to be a video. I'll see if it ends up playing stuff. I hope it does because it's got some cool stuff. But the other thing that's kind of unique for wolves that you guys probably keys something in your head is howling. Very, very different. You guys know a lot of the other species around here, and they vocalize things. You hear noises from bears, you hear noises from coyotes. Wolves are grossly different, man. They have a very unique way of communicating with one another. Howling is a thing that's specific to wolves. It's very unique to packs, to individual animals. They use it as a legitimate way of actually talking with one another. A lot of what you hear with some of our other species, they're not necessarily using it to communicate with anything other than a bear that's sitting up in the trees here in town. It's just telling you that it doesn't want you there. It wants you further away than where you're currently standing taking a picture. And so when you hear them popping their jaws and kind of hissing at you, that's more of a defensive thing. Wolves are doing that. Sometimes they'll do it in a defensive mode, but a lot of times they're communicating with other members of the pack, with other animals on the ground. They're communicating internally, just routinely on their own. Let's see if this will. Oh no, there goes. This link failed due to an error. Maybe it'll play here. And then I got to get Adam to pull me back to my presentation. Will this play, Adam? Sound?
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Never mind. So pretend like you can hear it. It's a thing. Yeah, thanks. There you go. It actually is. It's pretty interesting. It's fairly unique. The whole reason I wanted to bring that up is that it's not similar to coyotes at all. You would think, oh man, how am I going to be able to differentiate the sound of a wolf howl versus a coyote? It is grossly different. If you have any familiarity, which you should in Aspen here, we have enough coyotes cruising around up on Smuggler and over the North 40. There's a lot of coyotes around. If you've heard a coyote yipping and kind of doing that high-pitched bark, wolves are grossly different. It is a completely different sound. It's one of those things that all I can offer is you'll know it when you hear it. It's pretty recognizable. It's actually what you think of, what you kind of conceptualize. So next up, so Kurt's going to cover the next section here. Battery, just tap on that and it'll click it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, as Matt introduced me earlier, my name's Curtis Tesh. I'm the Upper Roaring Fork Valley officer. I know some of you folks walked in later, so wanted to throw that out there. We're going to go talk about Think Like a Wolf, preventing conflicts. So as Matt stated, we do know a lot about bears and lions. We've been dealing with them for a long time. A lot of you folks have dealt with them yourselves. You know how to prevent your livestock, your pets, your property, stuff like that. So nice thing about wolves and their behaviors, we're going to be able to relate that a lot to bears and lions. You guys have been doing this already. You know, you've been putting up electric fences to protect your goats, your sheep, your cows. You've been putting your dogs in their pens at night. You're walking your dogs on leashes, correct? Wherever you go? Good. So if we continue to do all that same stuff, we are going to be fine if wolves do end up finding their way into our valley. So wolves are mostly afraid of humans and will avoid humans. They don't want to be near you folks. Just like any animal, they need food, they need shelter, they need space, and they need water. And they're going to be looking for those things. If they're out there and they stumble upon you, they're going to let you know that you're too close, and you're going to take the necessary steps to give that space to allow them the appropriate space that they need. They will, like bears, though, become habituated to people if they are around us more often than not. If they see us, if we recreate in their habitats, they will get somewhat used to us. Just like bears come in, they look for food, just like wolves will as well. If, you know, like Matt said, they're not taking down large predators until they're more packed up. If they're a single animal, they're going to be looking for stuff. So it's, you know, important that we take those necessary preventative steps so that we don't allow them to get those easy food accesses and allow them to feel comfortable within our places. Give them appropriate space. Like I said, same thing as living with bears, coyotes, mountain lions, and wolves are exactly the same. Shelter. Like we discussed, preventing issues with pets, enclosed shelters. You know, if you've got pets, you got goats, you got chickens, anything like that on your property at night, it's important to bring those in, lock them in an enclosed shelter or a pen that has electric fence around it. No different than we do with bears and lions. There's lights and noise options that we can utilize to help scare them off if they do come too close. As we talked about, keeping dogs on leash is very important. There's bell and beeper collars that help you signal to other animals that they're around. And then clearing stuff around your property. Not only is it good for fire mitigation, but it's also good for bears and then now wolves. You know, if there's that clear space around your property, they're not going to be as likely to venture through those open spaces as they would if they have brush or something else to hide as they're wandering around. If you're out camping, hiking, anything like that, like we all do here, we need to be aware of our surroundings. You know, we have moose out here, we have bears, we have lions again. If you are camping, keep a clean camp, make sure everything's picked up nice. If you go for a hike in the afternoon, make sure you put all your food away, just like you do with your bear canisters and stuff like that, to ensure that no other animals are coming in. Pack out your trash, keep your pets close. Yeah, just like we do for everything else. Other tips to consider in wolf country.
So real quick, before we leave that other topic, I mean, you heard it, same things that you guys know, the same things you guys have been practicing. I mean, you guys have years of experience now practicing, getting ready for stuff. It's really no different. A couple things I'll highlight. So, you know, if you go look at the literature as well for, you know, incidents where bears threaten human safety or mountain lions attack people, those kinds of things, it's rare. It's extremely rare with wolves as well. The one thing that it's a little bit unique to our valley, to some of our, just what we have in Colorado, we have a lot of people. I mean, there's just a lot of people, no matter what time of year, where you go in the state. There's just a lot of people. So sometimes these animals don't have the opportunity to avoid people, and that's where we end up getting most of our conflicts. For our staff here in the room, a lot of ours is based on animals acting defensive. You know, it's something that's there. We don't go out there and we're not necessarily trying to invite a conflict, but, you know, be cautious, be aware. Probably a higher chance that if you're walking your dog, you're going to run into a conflict with a coyote or a mountain lion. We have more coyotes and mountain lions around here. The other thing that I'll make note of, though, is think about whenever you're cruising around in our valley here, where do you see deer and where do you see elk, specifically this time of year? I mean, when you're driving and you're going down valley, and we have all those elk piled up on McLean Flats, or they're sitting right next to the airport, or if you go down by Carbondale and they're sitting there on Aspen Glen on the golf course, as humans, just as a species, we've developed a lot of where our deer and elk want to spend their winter. I mentioned, this is all high elevation habitats around here. They're not equipped to spend a winter living at 11,000 feet up in the Maroon Bells. In order to survive, they've got to come down into our valley floor. And when the deer, elk, everything else are hanging out in the valley floor, if wolves are truly behaving like wolves and are preying on the species we want them to feed on, they're going to follow those species where they go. And so when those elk are hanging out down in the middle of all the houses over on McLean Flats, or they're hanging out, down in Snowmass Village, it's a thing. They just know that there's mountain lions that are going to be following them. If a wolf is preying on deer and elk, they're going to be following them. So we should also be cautious about just where, paying attention to our surroundings. You saw on the previous slide, that was one of the bullet points, is pay attention. Know what you're walking into. You can read, as human beings, we have the capability of reading our landscape pretty well and figuring out, hey, if there's deer here, reasonably, there's probably things that are feeding on deer somewhere close by as well. Just notes to make for ourselves. The other thing that's kind of unique to wolves, you've probably heard us talk ad nauseum about conflicts with dogs and mountain lions, dogs and coyotes. Most of the time, mountain lions, they're not going after domestic dogs unless they're starving and they're seeking out your dog as a food source. They want to eat your dog. Wolves don't necessarily do that because they want to eat your dog. It's another canine. They recognize your dog as another canine competition, and when it comes to territories, that's where our conflicts with coyotes and dogs often comes into play, is they're defending their territory. Same thing with wolves. Wolves are just bigger than coyotes. We'll get into a slide here in a second to just demonstrate the difference, because you guys probably have some familiarity with how large a coyote is. Wolves are a significantly different animal than a coyote. They're much larger. The potential for whenever they get into a tussle, there's a lot more potential for damage and some other things. But I just want to make sure we're not trying to scare you guys or anything. Mainly want to reinforce that you guys already know. In the back of your head, you already know what to do and how to do it. It's just refreshing your memory and making sure you're paying attention to what you already know and dusting that off, brushing up on your skills and just making yourself re-aware of some of the things that you've been practicing over the years just because. Wolves will avoid people, if given the opportunity. We saw it last year with some of the releases up in northern Grand County, some of that stuff. They're going to avoid people. Again, in the Roaring Fork Valley, I would challenge any of you to go out and spend a day anywhere in the valley avoiding people and go someplace where you're not going to see another person. When we just have a lot of people, wolves will avoid people. But if you're sitting in our valley, there's only so much you can do to truly avoid people. So with that in mind, it's our job. We're kind of starting with a clean slate here. Right now, our back's against the wall when it comes to managing bears. We have a lot of bears that have spent their entire life being assimilated to dealing with people. They're accustomed to people. They don't see people as a threat. They don't know how to work in a natural setting, even if they were put in a natural setting, because they're so used to people. A lot of these wolves, we've got the opportunity here to keep them wild so that they don't become accustomed to living with people. Hopefully that's our goal as a community, is to make sure that wolves stay wild and that we're not affording them the opportunity to start habituating and getting comfortable living in town. I think when they start finding places in town, that's where, I look around some of our partner agencies, and that's where all of our time gets spent, hazing them out of town, chasing them, keeping people safe, keeping animals wild. It's an uphill battle. So if we can start out fresh here and try to do it right from the get-go, I think that's our best bet on this one. Reading body language. You guys, we talked a little bit earlier about how you guys can, you guys know how to tell a bear when a bear's acting aggressive versus a bear just being a bear. Wolves, think about your pet dogs. A lot of the things that you guys see on your dogs, a lot of these probably, you recognize those same behaviors whenever you go home and your dog doesn't like what you're doing. When they lower their body down to the ground, when they tuck their tail, when you guys can see the hairs on their back and the back of their neck standing up, those are all signs of them being agitated. They'll pin their ears back. Sometimes they'll show teeth, sometimes they won't. That they call it baring their teeth, but when they peel the corners of their mouth back. That's all just, that's that wolf's version of telling you, hey, I do not like what's going on here. Same thing with the bear sitting there and snapping its jaws and popping its jaws and making huffing noises. That's that bear signaling to you, do something different, because you're forcing me to do something I don't want to do. You have the control in that situation. If you can help read the scenario there and help avoid that conflict, most of the time, all it takes is giving that animal space, whether it's a bear, mountain lion, wolf. You give them space and the opportunity to get out of there, they're going to pick that over fighting you any day of the week. If they fight you, they're doing that typically as a last resort. What to do if you encounter a wolf. So this is another super cool video that I'm assuming isn't going to play. So pretend it's an awesome video that just taught you how to prep for a wolf. Really what it is this is Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. It was one of their seasonal employees that had a wolf encounter and was just describing her events with that wolf. Just like you guys know. I mean, you guys come across moose. You see moose there. Moose are pretty tolerant. Bears are pretty tolerant. At some point, though, you cross that threshold where they're not tolerant. Sometimes it's because that bear's busy with its head in a trash can, isn't paying attention. It doesn't actually even know you're there. And when you startle it, that startle response, that's what causes that conflict. A lot of same things go for wolves. Think about the direction the wind's blowing. Think about what they're paying attention to. If they're aware you're there, most animals, wolves and everything else, will try to avoid you unless they're habituated. But under normal circumstances, they're going to try to avoid you. So keep them wild. Pay attention. You've got the upper hand here. I mean, you've got the cognitive ability to kind of play that scenario out. Here's that whole thing. I know this text is really, really small, so I'll kind of go through, and the next slide will do a better job. Wolves versus coyotes. You guys can take a look at the difference, just the physical difference. You guys on your own can start looking and just see what some of those things are that you're paying attention to. Wolves, coyotes, much more pointed features. Their ears, larger, more pointed, snout, longer, more pointed looking, where wolves, all that, they have the same characteristics. A lot of that's just more further blended into one another. Wolves significantly larger. I mean, realistically, we'll go, let me see on this next slide. I think this next one says. But wolves typically, you know, a full-grown mature wolf, anywhere in that realm of about 4 to 6 feet in length. Fairly large animal. For males, they're typically in that 90, 100, 110 pound range. Compare that to a coyote. Coyotes significantly smaller. Most of the time we're looking at coyotes of 40 pounds, 30 to 40 pounds. So reasonably more than double the size of a coyote. They're significantly larger animals. I'll go to the next one because it shows you kind of the difference. Fox, coyote, wolf, take a look at that. That's a general mountain lion versus a human. Wolf is about the same size mountain lion. They tend to look fuller because of their coat. I mean, they have a very heavy, thick coat on them, but they are very, very large animals. You know, I've helped with some of the other stuff that was going on in other portions of the state, have seen some of these animals up close. You know, I look at that and like, well, that means something to me. Just telling you from a personal experience, it is grossly different. The size of those animals is considerably different than what we are accustomed to when we see a coyote. Toward the end of the presentation here, we'll tell you about our wolf sighting report form and some of these other things on how you can help us manage things, how you can help us keep in tabs with what's going on the landscape. We get a lot of reports right now on people saying, hey, saw a wolf, want you to know about it. Grossly appreciative. Even if there's a question in your mind, we want you to tell us when you think you see them. We have collars on some of the wolves in the state. We also recognize there are wolves already moving into the state that don't have collars. We only know what we know, but even some of those wolves that are currently collared, some of those collars are already failing. You know, I was telling about frequency and battery length and duration and everything. Some of those collars are already failing. It's a mechanical device. You guys know technology. It's going to fail. So it's just a thing that, you know, we can't count on it to provide us everything that we always want to know. But with that in mind, the people of the state, you know, we just talked about, you're going to see people everywhere. People have a better read on what's actually happening with the resource of the state on a real-time basis than any collar that we're ever going to put on an animal. So, but when you look at that, take a look and figure out size comparison. I I mean, people tell us, hey, I saw a wolf there, and then we can look at some of the other things, the fence posts, the cars that it's running past, and we can do a comparison, and most of everything that gets turned into us, it's coyotes. And there's a lot of big, fluffy coyotes out there. We grow some really, really awesome coyotes in this state, too. More often than not, you're not going to see the actual animal. I mean, that's the same thing goes for mountain lions, same thing goes for bears, same thing goes for moose. You guys know how that game gets played. You'll see the things that they leave behind, whether it's their tracks, their scat, everything else. Wolf scat versus, domestic dog. We got a lot of dogs in this valley. Everybody walks their dog. You're going to come across a lot of that on every single trail you see out there. Biggest thing for you to differentiate is wolves. They're going to have a high density of hair in there. You think about what they're feeding on. Most of that scat isn't segmented. They're not feeding on dog food. They're not feeding on processed things. They're feeding on things that are covered in hair. So if you start seeing stuff that's covered in hair, granted, foxes, coyotes also fall into that same category. But again, think about the size of the animal it's coming out of. It's going to be a fairly significant pile. When you start looking at tracks, I'm sure several of you have studied difference between mountain lions versus canines, and we always talk about mountain lions, cats. You don't see the claw marks because they have retractable claws. So your house cat, mountain lions, other felines, retractable claws, no claw marks. Canines, claw marks. You start looking at the lobes on and the shape of the overall pad there. Wolves, coyotes, they're going to look very similar to that. The biggest difference is the size. When you start looking at wolf tracks, their tracks, it's pretty remarkable the size there. Most of their tracks, you're looking at 4 to 5 inches. So if you think about that and you put it up against your hand, 4 to 5 inches, it's a fairly significant track. We do have large domestic dogs, that you guys see them wandering around the streets. It can be misleading because we'll get that a lot too, where people will turn in a track. They'll have, if you send us a picture of a track, put something down that we know what the size of it is. People will send in a picture of a track and then they'll throw their glove down there. Like, yeah, but is that a woman's small or a men's XL glove? Great, it's really awesome to tell us the size compared to that glove, but I don't know the size of that glove. If you can put something down like a dollar bill, I know the size of a dollar bill. I can measure the size of a dollar bill, and I can take a look at that and put it next to it. Put something down that, I can kind of use as a frame of reference for whatever that is for perspective and figure it out. But tracks are a really, really good way right now, working with a lot of our communities in Routt County, in Jackson County, in Grand County. A lot of how we're tracking these animals and their movements isn't by collar data. It's not actually by sightings. It's by where they're leaving their tracks. And we can kind of figure out where they're going, where they're hanging out, where they've been, how long they've been there, etc. Last part. I'll turn it over to Rachel since most of the stuff's going to get shipped over to her, and then she's going to wade through it and figure out how to get it to me.
So again, I'm Rachel Gonzalez. I'm the Public Information Officer for the region, so I cover kind of this whole northern corner of the state. A lot of the things that you guys actually saw in this last part of the presentation, we have on our website. So I saw a lot of phones taking photos and stuff. If you go to our website, you're going to find a lot of that stuff in our resources. And as Matt said, as we're learning as an agency on how to manage, we as a communication team are also learning on how we can be better communicators about this. So, we're constantly going through and making sure that we're updating with the most accurate information. Again, we're going to have that whole page on our website. You're going to find our wolf sighting on there, as well as all of the maps that you saw. So we actually keep a record of all of those maps so you can download and take a look. And again, we've got our living and recreating. We have our wolf resource guide. We're working on updating some of the conflict guides as well. I think we're going to have a new one posted either later this evening or sometime this week. So again, website is a great place. You can also sign up to receive either our news releases or newsletters, again, all done on our website. And that's going to be the way to get that instant communication. So, as we begin this round of Wolf Reintroductions at some point this month, we as a communication team have a plan. So whether it's the same plan tomorrow, because things change pretty quickly, we have a plan. And so we're going to push that information out, and you guys don't have to wait for it to show up in the news. You can have access to that by signing up for it on our website. And then Matt, do you want to go to kind of that next slide? So I know we're going to open it up for questions and answers here. I know we want to kind of try and stick to as close as the topic as we can. Obviously, if you have questions, please ask them. I'm also providing a link for our Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. We do have a commission meeting tomorrow. We are spending the full day, I believe, is going to be on wolf updates. That is streamed on our YouTube channel live. So if you go to our YouTube channel, there's a link through our website as well. It's automatically going to start. For virtual comment, that has closed to sign up for that, but you can always email our commissioners and pass on your feedback as well. The little QR code, it actually should take you straight to the page to make life easier for some. I even have issues with technology, so good luck. And I guess with that, Matt, I'll turn it back over to you.
Perfect, 'cause I don't have anything else.
Cool.
No, I wanted to, thanks, I wanted to utilize a bunch of this time mainly to not have me regurgitate a bunch of information to you guys and have you guys sit there. I wanted you guys to be able to learn some stuff, and hopefully you did. But more than anything, I wanted an opportunity to start hearing from you concerns, questions, other things. That's kind of my guiding light on what I need to be paying attention to, things that I need to be working on to help our communities, help you guys figure out how to live with wildlife. So I'll have Liza help facilitate how she wants to do this.
Raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. I think is the way to go. One other thing I just wanted to mention too is that, like we said at the beginning, this session is being recorded. So by the end of the week, there will be a recording of this available if you want to watch it again, if you want to see the slides, if you have people that are asking what you learned and you want to just share it directly with them. I know that we received many comments as well, people that were not able to make it, and that video recording will be available either at the ACES website or Open Space and Trails website, and we can probably send it to CPW as well, but that's where you can find this information again. So let's launch into questions.
Maybe you could send us the links to those videos, and we could include those on the site in case.
Perfect, definitely. Yeah, we can get you all that.
To see those, the ones that we missed.
And that is, really, not to downplay anything Rachel was saying there. There's more information on our website than I even know. Realistically, if I could find the time to go and just sit on our website and figure stuff out, they throw a ton of stuff up there. There is a lot of information related to every topic, not just wolf specific, but there is a bunch out there. Most questions that anybody would otherwise have, there is an answer embedded in everything they've put there. They've got hours and hours of fun there, so.
We can't all read the website. We brought Matt, who can also answer lots of questions and give us information. I saw one back here, and then I'll come up here.
Yeah. You said 3 of the wolves had died and 1 was shot. What happened to the other 2?
So there's another one. And so anytime a wolf dies, because they're federally protected right now, our protocol is that we work with the Fish and Wildlife Service. We'll go and take possession of that animal. We'll do a preliminary investigation on the site there, collect evidence, but then we are required to work with them to send those carcasses off to Ashland, Oregon, where they have a facility there. They have a forensic facility, and they go through and do a necropsy assessment. I mean, it's a very detailed analysis of what caused that death. So one of the other animals was actually, interestingly, it was on the other side of the Continental Divide. That was a wolf that ended up dying because it got into a skirmish with a mountain lion. Mountain lion won. So the interesting thing, I mean, you guys, I'd love to have front row seat to that one. That one would have been an interesting fight to bear witness to. Again, going back to wolves, though, they're tuned in to be a pack predator. When they're on their own, you guys think about how fast your cat is versus your dog. Advantage cat 100% of the time. Dogs are dogs, and yeah, they're good at certain things, but yeah, that wolf. From what I talked to my counterparts over there when they went and investigated, it was pretty cut and dry what had happened. But yeah, they would like to go and meet that mountain lion and see, that it's just an interesting thing. And recognize mountain lions over here, most of our mountain lions have never seen a wolf. So it'll be interesting to see how some of those things over time balance out. There will probably be some sort of a population, like an ecological equilibrium that'll have to be established at some point in there. The other animal was one that animal had multiple things going on with it. That one had also received, there were indications that it had also at some point been shot and had some injuries related to that one. There was also injuries on there associated with another canine. And so the lab in Oregon equated that to, that one had probably gotten into another skirmish with another wolf. And it was the injuries that one sustained, what caused that one to die, were based on wolf injuries. So just like here, every year we get deer, elk that when they're sparring in the fall, they gore each other, they kill each other. Territorial animals, mountain lions do the same thing, bears do the same thing. They're wild animals.
I got several things that hopefully will flow into one. My first thought was to get a gun, okay? But I'm wondering whether bear spray, horns, those kind of things will, if they actually are coming toward you, so you don't look at them in the eye, right? Okay, and carrying food, backpacking, are you carrying bait? And a dog on a leash, is that bait? And what about rabid wolves? How do they act?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. Okay.
Sorry.
No, I may have to go back to have you refresh, but the first one was about guns. I'm actually really glad you brought that up.
$100,000.
Yes. So right now in the state of Colorado, wolves are both a state endangered species and a federally listed species. So they're protected by. Right now, they are protected on all levels. With those protections, it is really, really restrictive on what you can and cannot do. Obviously, if you're protecting yourself, if a wolf is attacking you, there are no rules. You are allowed to protect yourself, and you're allowed to protect another person. So you're walking, with your friend, and that wolf is going after your friend. You are allowed to protect them, even if you have to kill that wolf. That same rule applies for mountain lions, bears, everything else. Same standard there. Beyond that, and this is where we've had lots of discussions with our producers specifically, because in their realm, they're protecting their livestock, which is also equates to their livelihood. The rules there there's differences there, because with bears, with lions, you guys know, I'm sure several of you, we have handed you rubber buckshot in the past and said, hey, next time that bear shows up, pelt it, get it moving on, don't let it sit around on your back porch. We don't want to get into your trash, your bird feeder, whatever else. With wolves, the only way you can shoot at that animal and cause it any kind of injury, which if you hit an animal with a beanbag, it's going to cause some degree of injury, is you have to receive a permit through us. So you guys may have recalled that back, a couple years ago, our agency filed for a 10J exemption from the Endangered Species Act. That 10J exemption allows us as an agency to to provide, to get some tools in place. So we have 3 permits that people are allowed to apply for and can receive in order to do that. One of them is an injurious non-lethal hazing permit, where this is all 3 of these permits are mostly specific to livestock producers, but people can utilize beanbag rounds, rubber buckshot, all those same things we're already familiar with in order to haze a wolf, in order to keep it off their livestock. Now, in that injurious non-lethal hazing permit, nothing says that somebody that lives in town couldn't apply for that. You can reasonably apply for that. However, one of the categories in there is demonstrating why there is a degree of wolf conflict. At the end of the day, while our agency will be the ones to administer that permit, we will authorize that person to utilize that permit. We take all that and report it back up to the Fish and Wildlife Service, so they're going to scrutinize and say, hey, why are you handing out 100 of these in downtown Aspen, and you guys don't even have wolves in Pitkin County right now? So there's some degree of responsibility associated with that as well. But the last part to that question is also the non-injurious hazing. So I was mentioning the injurious non-lethal hazing. That's anything that would cause injury, make physical contact with the animal, and otherwise likely to cause injury. You can also haze an animal without causing injury, like making noise. So that goes into the second part. On some of those scare devices, we always advocate with bears using air horns, some of those other noise-making devices. Use those. Those ones don't require a permit. Realistically, same thing. These wolves, especially in this first infancy round of everything in this state, most of these animals, they're coming from locations where they don't see a lot of people. If they start hearing air horns going off, probably the first time they've ever heard an air horn, think back to the first time you ever heard an air horn, it's going to cause alarm. Over time, though, things become conditioned, and that's where we don't even turn our head to see the car alarm that's going off behind us because we hear it so frequently now. Over time, that's where we're going to have to work as society to adapt to some of that if we have animals that start becoming conditioned. What was the next part?
Is bear spray even something you would use on a wolf?
I would say yes. If you're use bear spray. If you're having to use bear spray, think about the context of how far bear spray is actually productive. If you are having to use bear spray, even though it's causing harm to the animal, if it's that close to you and it is a threat, I don't care. I will find a way to create a new permit to protect you on that one. Because if that wolf is actually causing you harm and is that close to you and is a threat, then there's some other stuff going on associated with that. You need to protect yourself. I'm not telling you, don't wait for that thing to latch onto you and start biting you before you start protecting yourself. If you're able to administer bear spray on it, yeah, we need to be doing something to protect yourself. What was the next thing you had mentioned?
Dogs on leash being bait as well.
Dogs on leash.
Carrying food in your backpack.
Yeah, carrying food in your backpack. Realistically, maybe that's a thing with bears. Probably a thing with raccoons. Probably a lot of the birds we got around town here. That shouldn't be construed. If we have wolves that are tuned into finding food sources, granola bars, and other things in your backpack, that is not a natural prey item for a wolf. That's not what they're feeding on. So even then, even if you've got like jerky or something in your backpack, I'm not worried about a wolf utilizing that and tuning in on that one. That shouldn't be something. If you do have wolf, coyote, whatever, keying in on you because of that, there's other items. That's where we need to be informed because there's something else going on with that item. That goes into the last part of your question on diseased animals, rabies, other things. If there's animals out there that are carrying rabies, plague, other things that cause them to behave differently, obviously a lot of what we come into the context of is injured animals. They're behaving differently because of a reason. Let us know. We won't know. Typically, you can't. There's no way to look. You see the movies, Old Yeller and stuff like that. Some of these things where they're foaming at the mouth. Some of those things. I've handled rabid critters. Those stereotypical symptoms don't often manifest themselves whenever we come into contact. That's not a part of what we recognize. You likely won't know that animal has that disease. That's something that we won't find out till we send it to our health lab or go to Ashland and they do some testing afterward. Hard to say. If something came across and we were coming into possession of an animal, tested it, and it came back positive, whether it's a wolf bats, skunks, other things, that's where we're working with the county health department. We're working with all of our local partners, sheriff's department, police department, making sure that everybody knows about that and what the protocols are associated with that. Because likely that animal caught it from somewhere else, and there's other rabid animals sitting out there in the environment somewhere. So, but that's something for us to worry about and to do as a reactive measure. Dogs is bait on leash. It's not bait. I mean, go walk your dog. You have every right to walk your dog. Please leash it. I mean, we have more conflicts with dogs that go off of a leash and either chase wildlife or specific with mountain lions. Most of our mountain lion conflict, dogs off a leash, they go run around, do their thing. Mountain lions see that dog off a leash. Hey, there's my meal. And then the first thing the dog does is, I need help. I'm going back to mom and dad. And they run straight back to you, and they bring the mountain lion to you, and that's where the conflict occurs. So.
Is that the same with bears?
It can be. Typically, bears with dogs specifically run the other way. I mean, you'll take these big 400-pound boars, most massive creature in the world, staring you down, they're impenetrable to the world, and then you'll get this tiny little chihuahua barking at it, and the thing runs up a tree and stays there all day. It's a thing, so.
Thank you.
I just want to know the process to apply to be a release site if we have a large tract of land.
If you're interested in that, get in touch with me or come see me, email me, call me. You can look on our website. I mean, I'll touch base with you. We do, when we go through that process though, not every parcel is a candidate release site. We are paying attention to, even if you're okay with it, we're also looking out and seeing who's your neighbor. And if your neighbor ends up being Aspen Middle School, probably not the best scenario. We're trying to cover our own butts on that one. So it's one of those things that we'll go out and we'll talk about it with you and assess the site though and figure out the logistics on what that actually would look like. And if it's feasible and there's something that we might be able to utilize in that context, we'll work with you on that one. But yeah, we've had, to be fair, I wouldn't say that we haven't had any landowners approach us. We have had we've had a few landowners approach us. There's some of them that we've taken a look at their site and said, yeah, thanks, we appreciate that. That's really kind of you. It's just not a good site. There's a lot of things there that we would have to mitigate in order to make that something. Not saying that some of these other state-owned parcels don't have those same issues, but there's a difference going and releasing them on state-owned land versus on somebody's private parcel and having the fallout, the consequence result to the neighbors. So we'll work with you on that one. But if somebody is interested, definitely get in touch with me, with any of our staff. If you've got contact information from one of our other staff, let us know.
I was wondering about, if they're denning, is there a protocol that says, okay, around that den site, people cannot approach or whatever? So like you have for even the sheep or winter range for elk and stuff like that, you're asking people to stay away. Is there a situation like that for wolves that you
So that's a super, super good question. You guys are fairly familiar with a lot of other closures and other restrictions that would protect elk production areas, bighorn sheep, lambing areas. We put those measures in place whenever, those animals are susceptible. Wolves, when they're tied to a den site, they are tied to there. Their movement is fairly restricted to that den site or associated rendezvous points where they go out and feed and come back and bring their prey back to the young. They're pretty much geographically pinned to that area, so their movement they're pretty vulnerable at that point. They are also, that's where they're very territorial. They're protecting what they need to protect. So there are some different things associated with that. If we come up with a den site, the balance there that's different than bighorn sheep or elk is being an endangered species. We also have a responsibility where we can't necessarily go and say, hey, there is a 100-meter buffer around this area here. We can't tell you where the den site is, but we're going to draw a 100-meter circle here, and then you look at it and it pinpoints exactly where some of those are. We also don't want it to draw unnecessary attention to that location and compromise what those animals are otherwise doing. So there's It kind of depends, I mean, on where that site is, on what we would afford as far as protections, notices, other things. You know, we'd have to weigh that specific scenario and be like, okay, is this in a place where it is next to a school and we really truly have a responsibility to notify the school and let them know of some things they need to procedurally change? Or is this something where this is sitting up in the middle of Hunter Creek or the Maroon Bells? There's not as many people that come by here every single day. Sorry, kind of a really nebulous answer to a really good question.
So I noticed on your slide of the northern and southern reintroduction areas, your green and I can't remember the red zone, that green zone on the north covered both sides of I-70, including Aspen and the Roaring Fork Valley in the northern reintroduction area. Are you anticipating that in this reintroduction that there will be out of the 15, say 50% or seven or eight of them south of I-70?
No hard and fast rules on how many animals are going north versus south, but the proposal this year is definitely to have animals released both north and south of I-70. Right now, we're still in the process of kind of weighing and determining release sites. Our goal is to have a suite of sites. We'd like to have multiple options. Part of that is just from the logistics perspective. We can't predict when Brush Creek is going to get closed or when 82 is going to become a mess and we have a 10-car pileup and can't get through and can't get to certain locations, other things like that. So it's nice to have multiple sites across. But you'll note it's not, the southern stuff south of I-70 isn't just Aspen there. I mean, that extends over into the Eagle Valley. That goes over into some of the eastern portions of Garfield County, over by Rifle, Silt, Newcastle. So there are other places outside of the Roaring Fork Valley. So right now we're still trying to determine feasibility on multiple locations, both north and south.
Here come the hands. Hi. Can you talk a little bit about the selection process of the wolves that will be brought in here? Like age, sex, like ratios, males, females, the sex. Are they taken from different packs so that the diversity of the genetics will be better whenever they form packs here? I mean, how's that all happening up there?
Really good question. So selection process up there, whether it was in Oregon last year, British Columbia this year, some of that is determined by the agency or the management entity that we're receiving from. So in Oregon, they are managed, based on their management plan, they were very specific on, they knew where their packs were, and they were specific on, out of this pack, we know how many animals are here, only these animals are candidates. British Columbia, grossly different scenario there. They have just kind of a different management plan, different composition. For our purposes, really all we're looking for, we're obviously not wanting to capture pups. We want breeding age animals in the state. We want animals that the minute we bring them here, feasibly can reproduce. So we're looking for animals. The nice thing with wolves is 2 years of age or older, they're already ready. They're there. So any animal, any mature animal there is a candidate. Male versus female, we're just looking for a mix. Doesn't have to be 50% one or 50% the other. We're just looking for a mix of both of them. If we were to release animals north of I-70, we'd want to release both males and females reasonably north of I-70 so that they could pair up. But there's nothing too specific there. Most of the selection that we're looking at is just making sure that the animals aren't coming to us where, they're capturing them out of aircraft. And pretty tough out of an aircraft to do a real close assessment. But if you capture an animal and then you while you have it in hand, notice that this animal's suffering from a broken leg that's impairing its ability to get around, and this animal's, higher likelihood that it's going to look for the easy prey sources, and that might end up being domestic livestock or something else that we don't want. That's what we're looking at. We're looking for broken teeth, if the animal ends up being blind in one eye, that kind of thing. That's what they're assessing. Everything else, most of the other variations are all candidate animals. If they're a healthy animal and they're breeding age, they probably fit the bill.
And so, and there's not any color selection between the blacks and
No. Nope. Color's irrespective of all that. I mean, Yeah, maybe people have preferences on black or gray but
No, but genetically, the blacks behave one way in the gray. So
nope,
So that doesn't matter. what you
Nope.
consider.
not part of the consideration.
Thank you. Can I ask one?
Oh, go ahead, hang on.
We're also not going to take breeding pairs. So if we know that there is a breeding male and breeding female, we are not going to take them as well. And then, the pairs, yeah. So we're not going to take the pairs. So that's just not right to separate, a breeding male and female. The other piece to that is, we all think that we go back to our house pets, our dogs, and they can live up to 13 years. For a wolf, an average age for them is anywhere between 5 to 7 years. So the other piece to that with the age, we're probably not going to take a wolf that's, 4 years old, because unfortunately it's just kind of already getting to that time of life where they may not live past that. And the older an animal gets, especially with this kind of travel, that's also going to be a lot harder on the animal. So, we want to find animals that meet all of our criteria, they're healthy, but they're going to be able to survive that trip as well. So I just wanted to add that little piece.
Perfect, thanks. And generally speaking, as far as being able to, from the air, differentiate, age, there's that whole hierarchy within a pack. You can tell, there's mom and dad are there, and then everything else is they're young ones. So you can kind of differentiate on some of those ones. So obviously, if we already know that the breeding pair, they're the older age class ones, and we're not selecting them, but all their offspring, as long as they're not this year's young, would be the candidate ones.
Hi, I'm really curious, how many wolves are there currently? And then how many do you project to be in maybe 3 years from now, 5 and 10 years from now within the area of Colorado and then also maybe around Pitkin County?
Okay. So I'm going to start with the easy, the softball one there. There are 0 wolves in Pitkin County. Moving forward into the future, as far as predictions on what we would expect to see in Pitkin County, man, that's a tough one. It is, if you look at just the topography alone in our county, most of these wolves exist on landscapes that are not near as steep. They're not, our elevations here where we've got 12,000-foot peaks, everybody's looking pretty in shape. You guys have hiked a lot of these hills around here. It is steep country. Wolves aren't really acclimated for that kind of terrain. They don't do well there. A lot of the terrain where we see them thrive in is if you look in Colorado, you look at some of the, I don't know how familiar you guys are with the areas up by Meeker, Craig, some of the stuff south out of Steamboat in Grand County where we had a lot of them hanging out over there. It's fairly rolling, it's not high elevation stuff, kind of rolling hills. What we see around here, what we call home here, doesn't really fit the bill. That doesn't mean that they won't find a way to survive here. If they find food here and they find a way to make a go of it, they may surprise us. But up front, just looking at just what we know, probably rare circumstance that we'd see a high density of wolves in Pitkin County, just because most of Pitkin County falls in this shade of white. It's that not as desirable habitat. Even going to our prey species availability and densities, like right now, northern flat tops, some of that stuff there, our elk herds there, we're counting those herds, we're managing for herds in that 30 to 50,000 animals, whereas locally here, our elk herds that we're managing, a lot of these animals, we're managing some of these for, 5 to 7,000 animals, grossly different scales. So there's just that consideration there. Right now, we have different phases in our plan. If you're interested in that, go through our plan on the website and look at the phases. Phase 1 of our plan is looking to try to get 30 to 50 wolves in the state over the next 3 to 5 years. Once we get that established, then we move to phase 2. Phase 2, I'd have to remember the numbers on that one.
I think it's 250.
Is it 150?
250.
Up to 150, and there's this, or there's another certain number of breeding pairs, I think, in there that would establish phase 2, and then from there that we would move into phase 3. So phase 2 for our management plan would be removing them from an endangered species, in a state endangered species, to a state threatened species, and then the next hierarchy would be going from a state threatened species down to just a non-game species, where they're no longer threatened, but they're still protected, not considered a huntable species in the state. Oh, sorry, that was the first part of the question. How many animals are in the state currently? There's currently 9. So we had 2 animals in the state before that were collared. We ended up releasing the 10 animals last year, which brought us up to the 12, and then had 3 animals die. So there's currently 9 animals that we're monitoring in the state. That's not inclusive of if there are uncollared animals in the state.
So, not to be negative, but I'm just curious, if Pitkin County doesn't have a lot of great terrain, why are they the next on the list to have them released here? And I was going to say there's sort of 2 separate questions.
No, that's perfect. So let's answer that one real quick. I mean, you're right. Pitkin County doesn't have ideal habitat. A lot of the places that have good habitat fall outside of that polygon. So, I mean, the places that really, truly have a lot of good habitat, they fall into those realms where either we're going to kick them free and lose them to another state right away, or they're statutorily in a different place where we don't even have legal access to go and kick them out. So that's part of the consideration there. Reasonably, Pitkin County, you're right, it's on the fringe of what would be like optimal habitat. I'll be really honest with you, most of Colorado, even in the places that we have really good habitat, like just geographic resource habitat, we have a lot of people. That complicates things a lot. Even in some of those places up there, going up towards Steamboat, there's still a lot more people there than even the exact same type of habitat as that in other locations in the country or outside of the country. It's a thing. The other thing we also know is it really truly doesn't matter where we release these animals in this state, they're going to move. Where we kicked them free, even though those other polygons on that map showed that they kind of hung out somewhat in the same area, they were in the same watersheds. They remained in some of those same watersheds, but they moved to some of those different portions of those watersheds. So it's still highlighted there, but they did move around a little bit. So we can kick them free here, and nothing says that they're not going to go jump up over the top of one. I mean, some of the movements we were seeing, you remember they were 4-hour fixes on these collars. Some of the movements in those 4-hour windows were over 15 miles in a 4-hour time frame. I mean, they're capable of moving way, way long distances in a very short time span. So we might release them here, and then, before we even make it home that afternoon, they're already in the next county. What was the second part?
The second question, I guess part of it is a follow-up, because it just like there's a lot of green just south of Gunnison on your other map, and that seems like a good place. The other thing is a little bit along the lines of the questions that First Lady asked about. A lot of us like to go solo hiking and solo backpacking and mountain biking especially, and when we're mountain biking, we're not on some of those steeper areas, and if these wolves are wild and not acclimated to humans, what's keeping them from going, oh, look, a new species of deer, I wonder what that animal is, I'm kind of hungry.
Typically, they typically aren't that adventurous. Think about it in the context of even for a lot of our mountain lions, our bears, everything else, it's a calculated risk. When they're going after some of these prey sources, if they get injured in the process of doing it, they don't have a hospital to go to patch them up and get them back out on their feet, next week or next month kind of thing. There's nothing to doctor them up. So Mother Nature's pretty cruel. So when they make the decision to go after something and take it down as a prey item, most of the time that's where that whole, saying of preying on the weak, the sick, that kind of thing, some of it, it goes into, they're factoring into where's my best bet on killing something but not getting injured in return. We do see, there's a lot of these animals. Some of the short lifespan on a lot of these predatory species factors right into that. They live a pretty harsh lifestyle. They do get hurt when they're trying to take down an elk. An elk's going to fight back, and if you've ever been kicked by an elk hoof, it's not awesome. Yeah, it's going to hurt, and they run that risk. When it comes to bicycling, some of these other things associated with people, that's that version of unknown that we want to keep them on edge. Once they get comfortable with things, that's where they start, for lack of a better term, they start, associating and almost abusing it. They start figuring out ways of adapting and utilizing us they kind of exploit us. Bears are the perfect example. They figured out, yeah, Mother Nature's going to throw me a terrible food year. Well, I know my secret to making every year a good food year, and that's everybody sitting in this room produces trash and throws stuff away, and I can, even if Mother Nature gives me the worst food year ever and I would otherwise die, I know what my crutch is, and I'm going to find a way to circumvent what the natural process is. So my goal is to make sure that wolves don't get that advantage, that we keep them afraid of people. I think that's the best chance that we have and that wolves have.
Good evening. I'm one of the few livestock producers in the Capitol Creek Valley, well, almost the only one in the Capitol Creek Valley now. And I've heard a lot of rumors about release sites. And I'd like to confirm that you're not releasing them in the Capitol Creek or East Sopers Creek area.
So the rumors that have been spreading around, I mean, we were responding to some of those as we were walking in the door here today. There's been a lot of information posted on social media, lots of phone calls, everything else, specific to one of the landowners in the area there that has, and I'll tell you up front, has not offered a site for release over there. I'm not sure the root of the rumors or anything else. I mean, just people being people. Yeah, I mean, for all of our sites that we're looking into exploring, because of some of the protections, for the animals, for staff, for people, everything else, we're not going to come out and even on the state-owned parcels, we're not going to explicitly say, yeah, we're kicking them free on this site or tell you the dates or anything like that. We can't do it in order for us to do our jobs. But yeah, a lot of the rumors that I guarantee you've been hearing, not founded. I mean, we've been made aware of them as well. We've been talking with landowners, and those are not substantiated. As an agency, if we went and tried to dispel every rumor out there, that's all we would spend our time doing, which frankly is probably better than dealing with bears all the time. But we haven't come out and tried to go and fight that one specifically because the minute we do that, we're going to have another one pop up that we're going to have to go and fight that one, and it's just, yeah.
Hi, earlier you spoke about the pack being the breeding pair and then their offspring and generational offspring. When the pack gets too big, they some of them get kicked out. Do other packs assimilate those lone wolves, or are they kind of on their own for the rest of their life? And then I have a second question after that, just a quick one. But
typically, because of that whole territoriality side of things, they're not too welcoming of outside members coming in, and they have their own system established there. Doesn't mean that they wouldn't, but generally speaking, they don't. And that's where, if they would look to go and branch out on their own and establish their own pack elsewhere. Right now, in the infancy stages in Colorado, sky's the limit. There's a lot of unexploited habitat where maybe that's a possibility. As things start becoming established, that's where it gets a little bit more complex. That also plays into that whole shortened lifespan for a lot of these animals, because once they're out on their own, they're not as productive, and then they're in direct competition with everybody else that is being productive.
And then real quick question, the fifth Copper Creek pup, do you guys know if it's still alive? Is it still out there?
Still being, we still have activity in the area where we're still actively monitoring it. From what I heard from our biologists that are paying attention to it, nothing real recent, but as of here in December, they still were able to confirm with some of the camera information that animal was still alive. So it's found a way, it's still finding a way to make a go of it, even on its own, as a young animal.
Because the wolves are federally endangered in the state of Colorado, is an effort underway to do a NEPA EIS in order to open up national forest land to create better and more habitat for the wolves?
So that's an awesome question. Short answer for that is no. Currently, no. So the question was, recognizing that we would, in order to have access to federal lands for releases, we would have to get some sort of an EIS, a NEPA process completed in order to do that? And the answer was no, it's not. Part of it right now, what's playing into some of that consideration is the cost associated with it. Already, as it currently stands, I know this question wasn't asked, but it's probably going to come up at some point tonight. It's shown up in some newspaper articles and stuff, but the cost of this whole reintroduction process, it was initially proposed to be somewhere around that $800,000 mark. It currently, just for year one, we're already at 4.7 million. So, running NEPA on something as large scale as would be considered for the wolf reintroduction would cost millions of dollars to do. So that's been a limiting factor in going through and assessing some of that.
But if the money could be found, is there would there be the effort?
Possibly. The second thing that plays into that is the timeline associated with it. Even with the newer version of what, we've been working with our federal partners on the process going through NEPA, it's still something that takes generally years to accomplish. Whenever we set forward on some of everything and the statute was initially passed, we already had a timeline of 0 years in order to get things on the ground, and we were reasonably, on that optimistic side, going to have the initial reintroduction portion of it completed within the first 3 years, which probably would have lined up with what would have been the NEPA process. So we would have received NEPA after reintroduction, after the releases were actually occurring. Most of these animals, outside of that, the NEPA would have only been required for releases. Everything that was occurring on the landscape afterward, nothing says that those animals can't live on national forest their whole life. They just can't be released initially there.
We've talked about 2 more.
And with that, if there's still other questions, I know we have to leave the room kind of thing. I can stick around and answer a few questions, but I'll also make sure that I'll work with Liza to find a way that if you guys have questions, get us your contact info, and I can get you Rachel can help me get you a link that you guys can give me some questions, and we can follow up with you. I want to make sure we answer your questions and pay attention to the things that you guys have on your mind too. So
I'm just asking for. Does it work or not? Yeah.
It works for the recording.
Okay, so I'm asking for the livestock producers and ranchers, the people that I know. If you were releasing the wolves in a private release site, a private property, would you let them know? And also because some of these people have calving season going on right now, so it's kind of delicate, and they're very busy. 24/7 probably.
So the question is, if for livestock producers in the area, if we were going to select a release site that was in close proximity to active livestock, would we notify those producers, with upcoming calving seasons and other operations and such? Short answer is yes. We would work with them. We wouldn't necessarily be like, hey, FYI, tomorrow something's happening here. What we would take it into context of is, even right now, working in this state, all of the wolves that are living in this state at any given point are in close proximity to livestock. What we're seeing is that some of them, the Copper Creek Pack was a good example of that. They had a preference to go and select livestock as a prey source. A lot of these other ones, we have reports where they are actively moving through herds of cattle but don't prey on them. So we're also not wanting to cause undue alarm unnecessarily. Nothing says we wouldn't work with those producers, though, to establish some of those mitigation measures and implement some of those, fast-track some of those items that would otherwise be of benefit to them and help them protect their stock. So, we would work with producers on whatever that is. The nice thing with all of our local staff, they know a lot of their local producers. If you are a local producer and you don't know who your local CPW contact is, touch base with me, get my contact info, and make sure you know who that is so that if something were to show up on your doorstep, you know who to contact.
I'm not very much informed on the livestock wolf relationship that's occurred since you started the program. Has there been depredation, and what's the state's policy for that? Is there a reimbursement, or I just for the sake of people raising livestock, it is an important question.
It's a really good question. Yes, there is compensation. Yes, there have been depredations. Do you remember exactly how many confirmed? The number of investigated is a ton. And part of it's just that right now everything is being turned in as a possible wolf claim. The number of those that are actually confirmed is lower. I believe we're in that 46 since 2021, statewide. So, and that includes on the east side of the Continental Divide, because we did have a wolf kill livestock. Actually, it was from the Great Lakes region. A wolf wandered into the state over there outside of Colorado Springs, not associated with the release efforts, but still a gray wolf, and it ended up killing livestock over there. So we have had depredations, confirmed depredations. The state is liable for those damages and will reimburse producers. We've hosted several producer-oriented meetings. We actually had one here in this room here a month ago. But no, there are different compensation packages associated with that. Some are based on the actual loss of that animal, that single animal. Some are based on weaning weights and conception rates and everything else. So there's a whole different, there's a variation, there's a lot of variety to that.
Just as a follow-up, is there, like, is it lambs, is it cattle, is it chicken, what's the, just whatever?
So it's been primarily sheep and cattle. As part of the wolf package, it's different than mountain lions and bears. On the wolf one, it can also be claimed for loss of any kind of livestock animal, like a guarding animal, so dogs that are used in livestock protection or herding otherwise, those ones, if they receive damage, knowing that how wolves key in on other canines, those ones are also covered under that same statute, and there have been claims associated with that as well.
Did you say that we're supposed to contact you as a producer if we see a wolf show up on the property? Or contact our division, our local agent?
Just for sighting purposes?
Yeah, you just
Yes.
said.
Yeah, I would recommend it. I mean, you don't have to, but I would definitely recommend it. I would recommend if anybody sees one, contact us regardless of whether you're a producer or not. But especially if you're a producer, I would say let us know immediately. That way, if we can verify with caller data or anything else, but part of it too is all the different mitigation tools associated. That highlights a lot of that stuff for us, because the questions that get asked, where those tools, there's a finite number of those resources available. We can prioritize that based on where we know wolves are at, so.
And if they're near our cattle, what steps can we take to haze them, or what can we do?
Same thing for, as far as the non-injurious, you guys can use those methods to honk a horn, shoot a gun kind of thing, not at the animal, but, just the noise of it, air horns type stuff. Those kinds of things can be implemented in order to try to run them off. Producers are also afforded two other permits. The other two permits, because there are producers in the room, I'll cover those two real quick. One of them is called an in the act permit. That one is a retroactive permit where if a wolf is in the act of killing your stock, you don't need something proactively, you can shoot it on site. You can kill it right there, and you call us up immediately. We'll go out and investigate it, but we can issue you an in the act permit that authorizes, yes, this animal was causing damage to this calf, whatever else. They shot it, they killed it, they're legally covered. The other one is a chronic depredation permit. That's one where if you've been experiencing losses but haven't been able to catch up, haven't watched that happen kind of thing, and it's continuing to happen, that's where you apply for a permit through us again. All these are through us. And that would authorize the removal of specific animal or animals associated with that pack, with the intent being to disrupt that pack so that that pack doesn't want to continue the same behaviors. Disruption of those packs typically leads to those animals doing something different. If you got other questions, Dave, we hit me up too later. I'm for specifics.
Just piggybacking that, if when depredation continues to go, what is your mandate
process, policy. I appreciate what you just said, you can split them up. At what point in time does a pack then, if it continues and continues and continues, what's your responsibility in dealing with that pack? What do you do with them?
So that's the scenario that unfolded with the Copper Creek pack, because those depredations continued. So what ended up unfolding there was the removal. It was live capture of those animals. Granted, there's still one animal from that pack remaining on the landscape, but the other animals associated with that pack, the other 5 animals, were all removed from that site. They were taken to a captive location. I can tell you that probably isn't going to be the standard for everything. As an agency, we don't take that lightly into consideration. That's not something that we favorably want to do, is take an animal and go throw it in captivity, even on a temporary basis. We do that only as a last resort. Lethal removal has always been a consideration. What gets weighed into that equation is where we are on that reintroduction process as well. Part of the whole process is trying to get animals established on the landscape, and if we were to go through and lethally remove an entire pack, then that removes however many of those animals that would have otherwise counted toward that reintroduction process. So that's one of the things that gets taken into consideration when that decision's made. Those decisions are all made at the highest level of our agency and in consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service.
So tomorrow, as I had mentioned earlier, we do have our Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting. And again, as Matt said, because there are producers in the room, so one of the topics, and I was trying to find it real quick, and unfortunately I can't. So we are going to be discussing the definition for chronic depredation during tomorrow's meeting. If you go to our website, underneath the commission tab where the agenda and the commission documents are, it is listed in there. Again, I was trying to find it on here, but I can't. But that will be, I'm just trying to do it on my little phone here. Again, not tech savvy. But it is going to be one of the topics that is presented and discussed tomorrow.
Okay, actually, final 2 here and here, and then we'll wrap it up.
This is a question that's probably a little more philosophical, but personally, I'm just kind of curious for you and maybe some of the others in the audience, how many of you guys believe that wild taxpayer-funded land should be preserved for wild animals, including BLM, including U.S. Forest Service? Right now, many producers are only paying $1.35 per AUM, which is the same price they paid in 1940.
So there's a couple different parts to that question. First part was being a personal belief. I've got a whole bunch of personal beliefs. We all do. When I'm standing here in front of you, not my job to tell you what my personal beliefs are. My job is to represent my agency, who's charged with managing the wildlife resource of the state of Colorado. So, I mean, if we become friends and go have a beer, I'll throw a bunch of stuff your way. But it's something that, I'm sure everybody, we could pass the microphone around and we'll end up with 60 different versions of an answer on that same question. Associated with how, some of our public land management agencies, whether that's local, state, federal, how they manage their lands, all of us have different objectives for how we're doing things. CPW owns lands, and we have different objectives that we try to manage our lands in accordance with. Same as the BLM and the Forest Service, related to how their, what their allotments are and everything else. That's something that'd be a question for them. I'm not in a position where I can answer a question related to how the BLM manages theirs or why or.
Yeah, I appreciate you covering that.
So I'm afraid I'm a lot more practical than I am philosophical. Listening to the numbers that you threw out a few minutes ago, it sounds like you're already 500% over budget. Yes?
Yeah, I'm not as quick with the numbers, but sure, sounds right.
Budget is $800,000 and you spent $4.7 million. Is there any cap to the amount of tax dollars that's going to be spent on the project, or is it going to be funded without limit?
So that Honestly, let me real quick do this. Go to, question being, is there a cap to where the funding ends up stopping? Sorry. Oh, no, I close out of it. Okay, hang on. I'm going to do the short way. That goes to our commission. That is not a local level question. That one is realistically, a lot of that question, the heart of that question on where those financial resources are allocated and where they go, that's something truly that goes to, that's a state legislature level question. They're the ones ultimately that oversee a lot of the state spending authorities on different, whether it's a project, an individual project, or anything else. And that would be something for whether it's one of your local state elected officials or governor's office. That's where all of these discussions, those kinds of discussions are being hosted at the JBC, the Joint Budget Committee, with all of our elected officials that we send over to the state capitol there. No, it did not. It did not come embedded in that statute. Hey, real quick, just as a final note for everybody here. I mean, I get it is a super tough topic. We talk on our agency discusses really, really tough topics on a lot of different forums and formats. This is probably hands down the single most polarizing topic that in the course of my career I've ever had to negotiate and navigate. I will say to you as a community though that I appreciate your attentiveness, I appreciate your willingness to engage, and more than anything I appreciate your willingness to be respectful, recognizing that there are people in this room that are on opposite ends of the spectrum on how you view whether you support or don't support this topic. You guys are at least holding together as a community and trying to be respectful and productive there. Best we can do. I have visited other places in this state representing my agency where that has not been the temperature in the room. So it makes it way awesome though for me to want to continue to manage wildlife in this community, in this valley for you guys because of the way you conduct yourselves. So please continue that as we move through this because there's tough times ahead. So thank you.
Thanks again. One more round of applause for Matt.